I'm the type of person who easily falls into routines. About 5 years ago, I started drawing again after having taken a break from it for well over a decade. I started with graphite pencil and grids on paper, eventually trying colored pencils and gravitating towards a certain style of heavy blending and thick pencil wax layers. But I have to admit, the state I found myself in by 2022 was not one of artistic growth. Although I was possibly improving in small ways, I think I'd grown pretty stagnant overall. One head and shoulders portrait after another using the exact same process over and over again. Maybe that's part of what made me want to learn how to paint a few months ago. That feeling that I had fallen into a rut with my hobby. Whatever the reason, I decided around October to just give oil painting a shot and see what happens. Not to sound overly dramatic, but to me, starting to paint was really a revelation. I found that I apparently love painting. Don't get me wrong, I liked drawing, but painting is another level of satisfaction that I just never expected. As I've mentioned in other videos, I'm naturally still very much a novice. I can see I have so much to learn about every aspect: technique, composition, color, pretty much every piece. And strangely enough, this massive learning curve is actually exciting rather than concerning. The idea that I have so much ahead of me to learn is such a cool feeling. It's like anticipation prior to a movie or game you know is going to be one of your favorites. Like you know something fun is on the horizon. So painting has me in a place where I'm kind of stagnant no more, and I've got all sorts of plans in mind going forward. One of those plans, which is very far off, I think, is to eventually try to paint from life. One of those situations where you go to a class and paint someone who's physically there. Although I'm a huge fan of using measuring tools like a proportional divider or my old trusty ruler, I realized that I probably can't use these for life painting, or at least not to the extent that I would for a reference image on my iPad. I figured if I wanted to eventually run a marathon, I better start by getting used to jogging. So I started exercising what I hope to be the right muscles, which is freehanding and underpainting for portraits. I've done about 20 of these now without measurements, and I think I'm getting better. And if not getting significantly better, at least I do feel like I'm learning more as I go. These were all my usual head and shoulders portraits of people, which I hadn't really given much of a second thought about until recently. I was sitting around pondering what to paint next, and I had the sudden urge to push my limits again. I thought, if I'm trying to continue to force my way out of my comfort zone, why not try zooming the perspective out a bit? After all, if I do a from life portrait, why not do a whole figure pose instead of just a head? So not knowing if I was ready for this or if it would be a complete disaster, I dove right into it. I decided to use my vast new collection of reference photos from a portrait modeling session. I'll try to throw a link here to the video about that experience. But I went with the pose you see on screen, which I hoped was an easier one, relatively speaking. I mean, really, for me, any pose would be hard at this point, but this is not, at least not some wildly complicated perspective or view. And I think this turned out pretty well. I took the same approach I would for any other portrait. Started with a very thinned out paint for the underpainting. I started by working a rough head shape and then tried to compare that head shape to different connecting angles. So looking down the length of the neck to connect the shoulders and the arm that was touching the subject's face, just going piece by piece and looking at the overall size and trying to match it up and kind of gauge it that way. It wasn't perfect since I did have to adjust the leg size. I made them too small at the start, but eventually I was able to get it pretty close. And I think I got the right basics in place for the most part. The next major challenge was working on a smaller area for facial details. I was really worried this would derail me completely, but it actually came together for the most part. I typically work on 9 by 12 textured paper, and at this size it can be quite a challenge to capture finer details. So that's definitely an area I need to keep working on, that precision. But the rest of the painting was mostly a matter of finding good color combinations and trying to work them into the scene the right way. Not being so zoomed into the face provided a great opportunity to actually construct a real scene. Usually my paintings they're dominated by the subject's face, but this kind of gave a whole perspective to what was going on here. Some background and body positioning that I don't usually get to mess around with. So I'm encouraged by this piece, and I hope that I can keep pushing myself like this. Although I'm a hobbyist and can't devote as much time as I'd like to painting, it's quite a thrill when I can see even small steps of improvement. And actually doing a figure painting that I'm happy with is a pretty surprising development, and it feels kind of like a milestone for me. Naturally, I'll probably still do a lot of head and shoulder portraits, but I think I should keep trying to do these figure portraits too. It's always good to mix things up. Well, that's all I have for this one. I'm curious if anyone has any stories to relate about learning to paint or draw figures. As always, if anyone has any comments, I'd love to hear about other people's experiences. I'll let this painting finish out. Thanks for watching.